This is our second ABODE Academy via Zoom, and we're so excited you're here, and we've got a real treat tonight. Again, I just want to thank the Education Committee for coming up with this concept, and I think it's going to be great and well received out in the community. We had quite a few folks show up last week, and some even turned in surveys. We're really excited about that. So tonight you get the opportunity to fill out surveys again. So be sure to look for those and get those turned in. They're really going to help us when we write grants and do things with these numbers. Before we get started, just a couple things about Zoom. At the bottom of your screen, in the bottom left-hand corner, there's the mute button. I think Mary's already gone ahead and muted all of us, except me for right now, but that's where the mute button is. And then in the center of your screen is a little chat button. And Mary, on my screen, oh, there it is, got it, never mind. In the bottom center of your screen, when the little pop-up for all the little functions show up, there's a chat box. And we're gonna put our questions in that tonight. We've got a lot of people on Zoom with us, and it will just get really noisy and confusing. So if you have a question while our speakers are talking, just put them in the chat box, and then we'll go over them at the end of tonight. So what I'd like to do now is welcome our two guest speakers. We have Denise Miner-Williams and Deborah Hanus. Denise is a retired Army nurse. She has a postdoc in palliative care. Deborah founded the Center for Spiritual Growth in the Contemplative Life and has a doctorate in ministry in spiritual direction. So they come to us with a lot of expertise. So we're going to hear about ABODE's Contemplative Foundation. They're going to talk about our intentions and our practices, and that is the heart of our work. So with that said, in ABODE's contemplative tradition, we're going to start with a minute of centering. And I think, Denise, you offered to do that for us tonight.
Can do that.
Thank you.
So when we center ourselves, we need to make sure that we're comfortable, that we're relaxed. Relax our facial muscles. Relax your shoulders. Loosen your eyes. Loosen your face. Feel your breath. Breath in. And let it out. Let all the tension that you might have in your body out. Open your mind. Open your mind to what is beyond yourself. Where the big questions are. Who am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? Just bring yourself into that state. With that, I'd like to get started. Mary wanted me to talk about the mission, the vision, and the values. And those didn't come about easily. The founders, a lot of people who were in the concept of ABODE in the very early days came up with some initial work. And then early on, we had a retreat where we went away for a weekend and spent the entire weekend reflecting, trying to figure out exactly what we're doing here. Now, for most of you that were here last week, you know that ABODE is part of a movement to to improve the end-of-life experience for individuals and for families by providing a community home for dying people. But what does that entail? And we wanted a little more than that, and we wanted to go to a contemplative route. So we looked at our mission and vision and values, and I want to back up a second to clarify, because you might hear those terms a lot and not really know they sort of run together, mission, vision, values, and we don't always know the distinction among them. But the mission is what we're doing today. It defines who we are, what we do, who we serve, and how we serve. The vision is what we see for the future. And then the values are what we believe and what support our vision and what shape our culture. Because we have a very definitive culture at ABODE, a very distinct culture. We offer compassion, interfaith and spiritual care in a contemplative community so that those who are dying leave this world with dignity and grace. And the second part of it is that we teach the art of contemplative living and dying. So you see from the mission statement, it defines what we do. So we provide care, but what kind of care? How do we provide that? We provide it with compassion. We provide it in a spiritual manner, recognizing and honoring all faith backgrounds. And who are we providing this service to? We're providing those who are dying. And when our guests come to ABODE, they need to admit that they're dying. They need to recognize that. That's one of our screening questions. And that's not hard, not very easy to admit for most people. For many people, it's a hard thing. But when you are able to recognize that you're on that part of your life journey, you're welcome we welcome you to come to ABODE, where we will help you on that journey with dignity and grace. So I'll jump to the second part of teaching the art of contemplative living and dying quickly. And that's what part of what we do is education. That's what this ABODE Academy is about. That's when we reach out. Anybody who walks in the door, we are more than willing to talk with them and to let them know what we do. We go out and we speak. So we have, Bev's our education committee, and she's doing a bang-up job with that. So we're twofold. So we provide the care, but we also recognize that the people receiving the care are fairly few in number. But when we can reach out with the education and we can talk to people about how to walk that journey, how to accept dying with dignity and grace, that's where we're really changing the world. So our vision, which that mission then supports our vision, which is that we see that we want to live in a world where death is not feared. And we live fully until we die. Up until the moment we die, we're living fully. So yes, we can recognize that we're on the end of the journey of life, but we're still living until we draw that last breath. And when we look at we have a conceptual framework for ABODE, and it addresses transformation. It's the transformation of that fear of death that we are all naturally, I was going to say gifted with, and that's not too much of a gift, but that's our natural response to death. But we at ABODE try to work on the transformation from that fear to hope, because we know there's a better beyond. And that's part of our spiritual belief, that there is a better beyond. And even for those who don't believe there is a better beyond, we're there with them on this journey to provide as comfort and to walk with them and honor their dignity in doing so. So we also have 7 values, which are sort of a lot for an organization, and they're jam-packed with all sorts of things, because the founding group just couldn't not include a lot of things. We're very complex. And we've started working with the staff and volunteers in addressing each one of these values and really drawing into them and to make them come alive. Because too often mission values, vision and value statements are something that's put on a poster some way and not brought to life. But at ABODE, we're really working on ensuring that we address our values, we know our values, we live our values. So what we're doing when we explore each one of these values is to really go into the depth of what it entails. So I'll go through the seven values. And the first one is to embrace and accept those who enter our door. Just think of what that implies. The warmth, the human contact, the belonging, the welcome. So it's that embrace is for everyone who enters through the door of ABODE. For every guest, of course, but for every family member, every visitor, every hospice staff member that comes in. We are there to embrace and welcome everyone. The second one is to foster joy and honor the sacredness of living and dying. And it's important to recognize the difference between joy and happiness. Some might think that that's an oxymoronic to talk about being joyful when you're dying. But joy is something that's deep inside your soul, that's accepting. But again, we're recognizing that living and dying are sacred. That and sacred, the word sacred means a connectedness with God. So we have that element of understanding that this is very, very important. The third value is to serve and support others. To serve and support others and ourselves through tenderness and compassion. We can't give what we don't have. So we need to know ourselves, to be good to ourselves, to be compassionate with our own selves in order to be able to give that to others. We invite opportunities for listening and learning, for growth and healing. Again, growth and healing aren't usually words that you think of when someone's on their the last bit of their life. But there's always opportunity for growth, and there's always opportunity for healing. And that's what we mean by living fully until we die. Because we can heal any hurts that we may have had that have not been resolved. We can work on those, and when we do that, we grow. And as the staff and volunteers, we do that through listening. We have an agreement or a contract and with the training or orientation training. And one of that, there's statements for accepting and finding ways of communicating that affirm one another, that affirm ourselves and the other. And one of the first thing that is on the list is try it on. So what that means is that you listen to what the other is saying. And we're not just talking about the guests. We're talking about each other, the staff members and the volunteers. Listen to what another is saying and see how it resonates within ourselves. Is this something that conforms to my beliefs or understandings? What happens inside me when I hear you? So it's trying on the words of others, and that way we can, and then to be able to this helps with the understanding, and it facilitates a very deep conversation when you first listen and try on what the other person's saying. You know, when I first heard that, I didn't quite like it at first. You know? It's something that grows on you, but it's very powerful once you get really into understanding that. Another value is that we awaken hope, trust, and awareness. And that, you know, that's really delving into our contemplative atmosphere and culture that Dr. Hanus is going to talk about, that of the awareness of self, that requires reflection, the mindfulness of everything that we do. We can incorporate mindfulness in everything we do. In how we fold the towels, how we're sweeping the floor, or providing the food for one another. So it's that awakening to that awareness and to that hope and to that trust. And you'll see that you can really spend a lot of time in these things, and that's what we do with the staff meetings, is to talk about ways that we can put these values into action. What does it mean to act that way? What does it mean to awaken hope in someone or in myself? We attend to the dignity and spirit that permeate each moment. It's a way of being in each moment. And think about that. Think about how you coming into abode would put that into action. That each moment has dignity. So you look at the real hard times when you're struggling. And we've all gone through those hard times when perhaps we get so close to a guest who is so close to our own lives, and it just hurts. But there's a dignity in that. And when we share that with each other, we can help each other recognize that dignity. We inspire care and attention to words and actions. You know, I've often wondered why we tend to remember the hurtful things that have happened in our lives. We can start enumerating them. And we don't as easily remember all the wonderful times that have happened or the good things that have happened to us. What we do and say to others is extremely powerful, especially at a time when the emotions are very high and emotions are very intense. And if we keep that in mind, that everything that we say, especially with the family members, that's going to be with them for a long time. You know, I have personally been thinking about this, as I said, and one of the things that I'm working on right now is trying, when something very good happens to me or someone does a very kind things for me, I am trying to deliberately impress on my soul that memory, that I can pull up those memories much more easily than the hurts that have happened in my life. And I think that's something that perhaps we can all look at. So those are the values that we have. And again, you can see how intense they are. We can spend a lot of time working on one value and really unpacking it all. But that is what abode is about. It's complex, it's intense. It requires reflection, and that's our contemplative calling. Take it away, Deb.
Deb, before you do, I wanted to mention that our mission, vision, and values are on our website. So just go to abodehome.org and click about, and you'll see them listed there.
The mission and values are on the homepage, front and center. The mission and vision. The values are under the about, but you'll see the mission and vision right away. Thank you, Mary.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. That was very helpful for me to hear it presented afresh and anew. Tonight, I'm going to just take one piece of what Denise talked about, and that's trying to break open a little bit more this whole idea, practice, approach that we call contemplation or contemplative. Now, those are two very, very popular words in religiosity today. And they're also secular words. We use them both in a secular sense and we use them in a religious sense as well. And I'd like to briefly look at both of those ways, but then we will concentrate on a more spiritual understanding of the tradition, the long tradition of the word contemplative from, or contemplation, from which contemplative comes. And so we want to bring the meaning of contemplative into sharper focus and explore particularly the origin of the word and the way that we use it in faith-based settings. In the secular sense, the words contemplation and contemplative are often used in the concept of thinking deeply. For instance, we might use it in a sentence such as, he contemplated his options in trying to make a wide choice. So he's thinking deeply. And in contemporary religiosity, we might also use the word in the same way that we use meditation. But certainly the roots of meditation and contemplation are very, very different and very distinct. In Western culture, especially in American culture right now, we often talk about something like centering prayer or Ignatian meditation or Lectio Divina. And all of these are meditation and not particularly the same as contemplation. So neither of these uses, neither way that I've just mentioned, are really the way that I want to know in terms of the origins. Now, where you go with it, of course, is completely up to you. But let's look particularly at the origins of the word contemplation, which comes to us from a Latin word, contemplas, okay? So there's three parts to that word, okay? And they deal with a temple and a particular time of the year. And so it was the tradition of the ancient Romans to once a year go up to their temple and to sacrifice an animal. And they would then search carefully through the entrails of the animal for the will of the gods for the Roman people for the coming year. So that's not maybe as clean and pretty as our contemporary understanding of contemplation, but it is the origin of the word. And I think in the long run, that helps us much more than the other uses of the particular word. So they would look carefully at what they called the auguries, okay, and they would do this once a year. What I have found is a definition, a contemporary definition given to us by Walter Brueggemann, who's a contemporary Christian scholar. And he says that a possible definition for contemplation is to take a long, loving look at the real. So to take a long, loving look at the real. And that's kind of the direction we're going to go with this for the next few minutes. Maybe to break that open and to see how it might apply to the care of the dying, I'd like to begin or continue with telling you a story. And this story comes from the Jewish Talmud tradition. So this is what the Jews might call midrash. It's stories, folk stories, etc., that help us to understand the invitations that God gives us throughout life. So let's hear the story from the Talmud tradition for just a moment. And the name of that particular story is Praying for Healing Unto Death. So Rabbi Judah was suffering from a severe and painful stomach disease. He was much loved, and his many friends and students and his household had gathered around him to pray and to offer unceasing prayers that he might live. They were so adamant that the rabbi should live that they forbade anyone from saying he would die. The rabbi's devoted handmaid ascended to the roof of the house where the rabbi lay as he died, and she prayed, "Please, Lord, let the rabbi live just as his friends and family want him to." She stayed next to the rabbi, caring for him in his suffering, and soon noticed that his stomach ailment caused him to painfully arise from his bed each hour to use the latrine. This became increasingly difficult and exhausting for him. Seeing this, her heart went out to him, and soon she prayed, "Please, Lord, let your will be done, not mine." She picked up an earthen pot from the rooftop and threw it, sent it crashing down to the ground below with a powerful explosion. The prayers gathered there were so startled that they ceased praying for a split second, enough for the rabbi's soul to slip the bonds of earth and to fly to God. And so here we have a story that it really in so many ways encompasses for us the real lived experience of contemplation, understood as a long, loving look at the real. Okay, while all the loved ones, while everyone loved the rabbi, they were not particularly attentive. And you noticed in what Denise shared with us, attention, being attentive to what is real is very key here. But they weren't really attentive to the reality of his situation. There was not so much a compassionate response to his reality as there was a conventional response, and we can understand it. The handmaid, however, was both attentive and compassionate. She came close to him. She came near to him, and this is important. She was nearby. She contemplated him. That is, she looked at him with eyes of both reality and love, and was attentive in a way that moved her to pass beyond herself. She had to pass through her own will, her way of looking at things, and begin to look at life, things, God, the rabbi, in a whole new way. So contemplation has that idea that we go back to in the Romans of sorting through, looking through. If you're a little queasy, you can get a stick and move the entrails around. But that's what we also call in the Christian faith discernment, taking a long, loving look at what is really in front of us. So she moved through herself and through her own will into the rabbi's reality, okay? It wasn't the people who loved him, that wasn't the reality that was important, but the rabbi's reality. Though the rabbi's death was not something she desired, she took compassionate action, the action she knew she could take, by interrupting those energies which stood as a barrier of the rabbi moving through this reality for himself. So the attitude and practice of the handmaid can be found in the attitude and practice of those who minister at ABODE today. They're attentive to the needs of those whom they welcome. So here we have a story that can be interpreted in many ways, of course, but for our purposes, let's consider at least three things. One is reality. What is it that we're taking this long, loving look at? Well, any human's experiences reality, okay? So that can be interior reality, such as your feelings, or exterior reality, the suffering of other people or the joys of other people. So contemplation in itself doesn't just grow up out of some hazy idea. Rather, it's not an idea. It's a way of living your life. So contemplation has very little to do with heavy-duty thinking about reality, and rather entering into your reality. Attentiveness, or paying attention, which we have mentioned and we have heard also from Denise. So attentiveness, the handmaid became attentive. She paid attention. And again, attentiveness is open to everyone, whether they're a believer or not. So secular people can certainly have a highly developed sense of paying attention. However, if the practitioner is God-centered, then attentiveness can take on a whole new significance. In paying attention to reality, both my reality in self, as well as in others, we find a commonality. When I pay attention to you, then I find, oh, we're both human. Okay, we're connected together by the belly button, you know. You have the same emotions I do, the same fears, the same anxieties. Okay, so attentiveness brings us near to others. Okay, if we pay attention, then we can cultivate this idea of nearness. And finally, love or compassion, a long, loving look at compassion. And compassion here means to move through oneself, okay? That doesn't mean to ignore oneself, but it does mean to move beyond oneself. The poet T.S. Eliot wrote that all of us throughout our life are either being cared for or caring for. So all of our relationships deal with being in relationship, usually in some kind of, so at some place along the continuum of care. And the questions sometimes comes up, can we grow in taking a long, loving look at ourselves? Can we grow in contemplative living? And yes, we can, on the one hand, and on a slightly other hand, we cannot. If you are a Christian, then your belief is that God gives the gift of contemplation. Okay? So gifts are not to be demanded or even expected in an aggressive sort of way, but rather we ask God for the gift of love and compassion for others. So we can cultivate, or we can develop a sense of taking a long, loving look. And I would like to suggest 3 simple practices, if you care to employ them or include them in your life. And if anyone wants the full text of this talk, you're welcome to email me, and I'll just send it to you as an attachment, and I'll give you my email before we close today. So the first thing of growing in attentive compassion we can do is, first of all, cultivate a daily practice of noticing your own life, noticing the people. Each day, remember You may want to record using a little bit of a journal. Record the people whom you have encountered that day, the feelings that you have had that day, the thoughts that you want to go back and break open a little bit more. So count yourself as worthwhile of noticing. You probably won't be such a good noticer of other people until you begin to notice yourself. Okay, so that might be one way, a little bit of a record of a recalling. So you could do a recalling of your life. Doesn't have to be long. Put aside 15 minutes for all three of these practices, and you could do that periodically even, and you will begin to notice your humanity and the humanity of others. The second suggestion that I would suggest to you is learn to become attentive and to really notice. One of the ways I practice my own contemplative energies is through being a docent at the San Antonio Museum of Art. And when my students come and we want to begin to notice the detail in a picture, I have each one of them make a keyhole card. This is a very simple little thing that every one of you can do. All it is a note card out of which I have cut a small keyhole or spy hole, and I have the students look through it at the picture, and they begin to notice all kinds of things that they never saw before. It's wonderful to use with your family photographs too. Put all your family photographs there and just look at the way people, your friends, your grandmother, your sister, held their hands, or look at their eyes. You know, what a beautiful, beautiful way of learning to become attentive. But you can do it with any object. Begin to attend to each part. God is of the details, they say. So the contemplative is one who is present to the detail of life. And the third thing that I would suggest is to practice self-compassion. As you remember your reality, all of these things that I'm suggesting, both about yourself and others, consider the invitation to become compassion, not just to practice compassion like it's something outside of yourself, but begin to find within yourself a way of naming yourself as compassionate energy. And see yourself approaching others as compassion, and allow yourself to see others approaching you as compassion. We don't do onto the person in the bed. We are one with the person in the bed. Okay. If we're really being contemplative, we're moving into union and oneness. We're not separating ourselves. We too will die. We are always on that continuum, either being cared for or caring for. So how each person receives this care is unique to each guest. Okay, there's no one thing to look for. If you want to know if this was helpful, not successful, we're not looking for success, but if your care of the other was helpful, then you must receive that message from them. Okay, there's no exterior standards for that in particular, but only that ABODE, as Denise pointed out to us several times, is all about this idea of showing respect and dignity. So that's what we can do while we are cultivating our own contemplative natures, our own contemplative serve. You know, they talk about improving your serve. Well, here are some ways we can improve our serve, but we play for the joy of the game, not just to win. And that's what we're doing in relationship with the residents at the abode. We shouldn't get too hung up on doing things right, okay? Because that doesn't show compassion to ourselves, okay? If we want to live nonviolently, then we have to begin with nonviolence to ourselves and let ourselves be loved. In some way, religious or spiritual, we must, in the end, see the deathbed as more than a bed. It is an altar where the flesh and blood of a life is transformed into spirit. And each caretaker and family member bestow their blessing upon the dying. And then I would just like to end my talk with a poem from the Sufi Muslim tradition. This is by Hafiz. And Hafiz wrote this wonderful poem, very short. He often wrote very short poems. And he wrote, I know the one you are looking for. I call that person the Blessed One's twin. You once saw him, and so now your eyes are weaving a great net of tenderness that will one day capture God.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm unmuted. Oh my gosh, that was wonderful. Both of you, thank you so much. I was looking on the chat about, see if we've got some questions. One of the things, just, kind of hearing this, Deb, is that, as we do this work with the dying, me as a hospice nurse, and then we've got our navigators and our caregivers, this is so much needed for us to take care of ourselves, because this work can be very overwhelming. Each home I go into, there's crisis, right? And it'd be wonderful to be able to teach some of these thoughts and these values and to our families as they sit and they grieve. Mm-hmm. To look at the bed as an altar it's beautiful, because that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the place of the final blessing. When a person leaves on a trip, in many cultures, they are given a blessing for the journey. And I know many traditions have a formal kind of a blessing they give, but that might be a very interesting way, asking the family, do they wish to give a blessing to their loved one in the last moments? I don't know if you already do that, but perhaps there's a way to approach that.
Yeah. I think, when they tell us about self-care in this line of work, they talk a lot about self-care and rituals. Mm-hmm. That we all must have a ritual to move on, because with every death that we experience in our work, we carry some grief with us. And so to have a ritual after someone passes, whether it's, the blessings or to share stories, attend the funeral, attend the services, that, we each need a ritual to just kind of close that book, or put that life in a sacred place so you can move on.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. My daughter teaches anthropology at Incarnate Word College, and she has a whole course on the importance of creating personal rituals, because in American society today, particularly with our lives being so fragmented, we don't take time for rituals. We don't understand them. Most of us in some way or another will make our own little personal private rituals sometimes for things, but there's such a power in sharing rituals with other people.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important.
It is.
Mary writes, and either one of you can answer this, what does contemplative care look like and feel like for those on the receiving end? That's a great question.
Well, I certainly think that you have to ask that of that person. It's unique, it's different for each person. Some may be very aware of contemplative energy, but what I would think that is more important than using the word contemplative in all of that is, did they know themselves as loved, as worthwhile, and so any way that they might share that with their family, that might be the source to go to, because like I say, there's certainly no one, as you all know, y'all are the ones to know this, there's a different way to die for every human being that ever lived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Ted Gibbs, excuse me. Ted Gibbs writes,
Was that a dog?
Hold on just a second. There you go. You're back.
all right. So Ted Gibbs wrote, and I was kind of thinking of this as well. One of the challenges is working with family members that do not want to accept their loved one's passing. Without pushing your values on them, how do you be present and not offer your understanding of the process? And a perfect example of this that I run into a lot is I'll go into a home and the family will, after I kind of tell them why I'm there and we talk a little bit, they'll pull me aside and say, don't tell them they're dying. So now you got to go in and see this person, and the elephant's in the room, but we're not going to talk about it, right?
Denise, I would certainly like to hear your viewpoints on that. Denise, can Denise hear me?
I can hear, oh, okay. I'm back. I think it's a matter of just listening to their pain and recognizing their pain. I would venture to say that many, if not most people, know that they're dying. They've got some understanding of that, and you might say that to the family member, but mostly it's just listening. It's just being with them, offering them the comfort that they need. Edwin, do you have anything you can say to that? Mary, could you unmute him?
There we go. Well, one thing that we would say about people who come to ABODE, as you mentioned earlier, Denise, was that they're aware that they're in the last stages of life. And family members, you know, could not necessarily accept that. But I think that's really important, as you said, to just be with them where they are. When I was working as a hospice chaplain and part of an ethics committee, we oftentimes learned about this issue when nurses would come and say, you know, how am I supposed to take care of this person when she's dying and has accepted hospice care without being able to talk about it. And so, you know, it's troubling to staff, to nurses in the hospice world when they're not able to talk freely with the person who's dying. And, you know, I think what we would oftentimes find out or notice at some point is that the person who's dying begins to talk about his or her own dying. And so when that happens, it opens up the conversation a little bit. And, you know, we realize too at some level that when a person, a family member, doesn't want their loved one to know that he's dying, it's because oftentimes he's trying to protect her. And so when that is the dynamic, then maybe we also realize that the dying person is trying to protect that person as well. So we've all heard in hospice when a patient will say to a loved one, don't ever let me know if I'm ever dying. I don't want to know. So there are lots of dynamics, but really the aspect of listening is really important. And I think that also reflects too something about a listening heart. You know, being there with a person in their suffering is a form of compassion too.
You and
Muted. I got one more question. We're about to wrap up our hour. So this is from Kim. She wants to know, how do you come alongside those with different faiths if you don't have an understanding of that faith or the practice or rituals within?
I allow that person to lead me.
Mm-hmm.
What's important to you? What can I do to help you?
What do you want this time to be? Can I provide another person who might have the resource to do what you ask for?
Mm-hmm.
So I would not go with my giant size 10 flat feet shoes and run all over their soul with my inaccurate ideas of their faith.
That's good.
You know, I had a very interesting patient about 2 weeks ago, and she was from India and had come here for the birth of a grandchild, and ended up getting a brain bleed, and she died. And her daughter-in-law, they're all from India, but her daughter-in-law has lived in the United States for quite some time. And when we were talking about her ritual at death, she needed to know how to put, is it the sari that they put on the clothing? And she didn't know how to do it.
Sorry.
And yeah, and she asked me if I knew anybody. And so here we were online looking for how we were going to dress this woman after she passed. And it was lovely. Yeah. Okay. Well, everyone, that wraps up our hour. And that went fast.
Thank you. Thank
Denise,
you.
Deb, what a beautiful job. Thank you so much.
Thanks to everyone.
And so those of you on with us tonight, look for your surveys. They're going to be emailed to you. and get those in again so we can just, make improvements, hear what things you want to hear about later on, because ABODE Academy is here to stay. And next week, same time, same channel, Mary and I are going to present how hospices interface with ABODE, and and how we work with hospices. So I hope you can all join us and tell your friends. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.